Good morning, all. We're just going to let people filter in there for 1 minute. And just to welcome you all to this month's Simon Talk. We're joined this month by Sandra Cogan Williamson, who's going to speak about Cork City's sort of journey to developing a trauma-sensitive city. I think this is slightly unusual. As you know, with the Simon Talks, usually what we're talking about is giving a platform for people whose information we draw into our own work and then project out as part of our submissions. And it's that opportunity to sort of engage with the sort of primary sources that we would help out to inform our thinking around how we most effectively respond to homelessness. Sandra is talking about, I suppose, something that's an extension of things that we would have talked about before. So in homeless services, particularly in Cork Simon, but the Simon communities more generally, there's a development towards trauma-informed services, and it's been quite formative and really beneficial to service users as the communities have gone down that journey. Cork have been one of the leaders in that, but also as in Cork Simon and our services. But Cork City has gone on its own journey to make the city trauma sensitive. And Sandra has been leading on that work. And I think it's really fascinating and important. We were talking about it earlier and where it interacts with homelessness. I suppose we're still learning, but one of the areas that we definitely think that there's potential in is as we try to deal with the prevention of homelessness and indeed getting ahead of sort of the crisis that people may have, and a city structure that is trauma sensitive will have a part to play in that, and will be, I think, make us more successful in that work. As per usual, what we're going to do is save any questions to the end. Sandra's going to talk for 25 to 30 minutes, and then there will be a Q&A session at the end. But you don't have to wait till the end. If a question occurs and you don't want to kind of sit on it, do bang it into the Q&A tab at the bottom. You'll see that as at the bottom screen. There's the share screen, the Q&A chat. You can pop them in there and we'll pick them up as we go along. So as they occur to you, do bang them in. If you are online, tweeting or Facebooking or whatever it is you're doing, do use the hashtag Simon Talks, and obviously we'll support and retweet that. It's great to hear people's engagement on those as well. With no further ado, then I'm just going to quickly introduce Sandra. So I have her bio here, which I think was actually in the invitation, but for those who don't know, Sandra is a social inclusion specialist with over 20 years experience in community development. She's worked across a range of sectors, including social housing, youth services, homeless services, drugs and alcohol services, public services, and strategic development. She's a social, economic, and environmental manager of the Cork Northwest Quarter Regeneration Programme, focusing on capacity building and community development elements of the regeneration, and also coordinates the RAPID programme across the northwest of Cork City. Sandra is a PhD candidate with focused on embedding of trauma-informed practice at both the micro and macro levels. Sandra chairs and coordinates Cork Trauma Sensitive Cities Steering Committee, and she presents today on Cork's journey to developing a citywide strategy and pledge to become a trauma-sensitive city. And if you got all that, you're a better man or woman than I am. But with that, I'm going to hand you over to the very able Sandra, who will explain it all.
That's great. Thanks so much. Thanks, Wayne, for the lovely introduction. I'm just going to share my screen there now, and we begin. Hopefully it'll all go well. Can you all see that all right, yeah?
That's perfect, thanks.
That's brilliant. So thanks for inviting me on today. I'm delighted to be here. As Wayne said, my name is Sandra Cogan Williamson, and I work in the Community Culture and Placemaking Department in Cork City Council. And I'm here today to talk about our citywide trauma awareness, sensitivity, and healing through relationships, and an introduction to trauma. So this is part of our vision for Cork City. So before I do that, I'm just going to give you just a little overview of what we kind of do in our office, just so that you can see maybe the synergies and how we can tie the trauma-informed approach into what we do. So in my own office, I coordinate the RAPID programme. Cork is one of the only cities to have retained the RAPID programme after it was disbanded on a national level, and that was done because of the I suppose the relationships that were built and the way we were able to deliver different results across the communities in Cork. We also would run the LCDC, the Local Community Development Committee, and the SICAP programme through our office, as well as many different, today actually is the launch of the Lifelong Learning Festival in Cork. So we're a learning city and we're a healthy city, and I suppose we're now trying to be a trauma sensitive city. So all of the work that we do, I suppose we ensure that there's synergies right across all of the different components of what we deliver in our office, including the Joint Policing Committee and age-friendly cities, etc. So that's just to give you a little flavour of what we do. And I suppose the other thing just to say as well is we have had a very unique, I suppose, approach in our office for the past 6 years, where we've actually had a joint initiative with the Cork Kerry Social Inclusion side of the HSE, where Rebecca Lockery, who would be the SEO in our office, was also the head of social inclusion for Cork Kerry. So we had a joint initiative there with the HSE, and that provided excellent opportunities for many projects and synergies across the city. And it's a great model of best practice in terms of the local authority and the HSE working together and planning and trying to reduce duplication, particularly when it comes to community development. So I suppose before we begin, I just want to kind of have a little think about when we think about trauma and we think about what we're looking to do, just a few thoughts. So I suppose we're seeking to understand rather than be understood when we're talking about trauma sensitivity. We're looking at the idea that every person, in particular children, but not just children, needs a champion. They need that one good adult. They need that person whose face lights up when they see them. And that person that will be the person to speak up for them. As Dr. Karen Treisman says, every interaction is an intervention or an opportunity for an intervention. So if we can kind of bear all these things in mind, it'll kind of give you an idea of where we're coming from and how we got to where we are. I suppose, again, you know, we're to take care of those in our charge rather than focusing on being in charge. So again, it's looking at, you know, reversing, I suppose, how we approach things, especially if an organization has to have a lot of rules in order for it to work, but it's looking at how can we take care of those that are in our charge. At times, and you'll know this yourselves from working in homeless services, you know, blame is the discharge of anger. It's not necessary, it's not personal, and it's about really looking at where the person is coming from, looking at attention seeking, being connection seeking, and really looking at what is the person trying to tell us right now. Why is this behavior being presented, or why is this person experiencing a challenge in accessing our service or trying to communicate their needs right now. So it's around that connection seeking. It's really just changing how we kind of view things. Again, unacceptable behavior may be understandable behavior. So that's not to say that we have to accept behavior that's, you know, in any way like violent or aggressive or whatever, but it's looking at, again, well, maybe where's the person coming from, what's happened to them today, you know, what's their journey been like getting to our service today, why may they be a bit agitated, and how can we take a step back and try and look at it from an overarching lens. And again, that like maybe rudeness and defiance may be a protective behavior. And again, so it's really just thinking about how do those thoughts sit with us. And I suppose that's kind of a lot of the essence around trauma sensitive and trauma informed practices, is really about thinking about our own thoughts and how we change our behaviors and looking to seek to understand really rather than be understood. So it's just to kind of sit with those as I go through the presentation. So I suppose, what do we mean by trauma? And I know that a lot of you here today will really already have a good understanding about what we're talking about, but just so that everybody's kind of on the same page. I suppose when we talk about trauma, we're talking about individual trauma can result from an event or a series of events or a set of circumstances that are experienced by an individual as being physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, with lasting adverse effects on the person's functioning, their mental, physical, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And it is very much about how somebody experiences something. So you might experience something that really felt very harmful or life-threatening to you that may not necessarily feel the same way to me. So it is really about that individual experience. And then I suppose in terms of psychological trauma, it is that unique experience, and it's the person's ability to integrate it into their emotional experience if they're overwhelmed, or the person's experiences which are subjective as a threat to life or bodily harm, integrity and sanity. So it really is that personal, how it lands with you, how you are in the day, you know, what's gone before, it could be a trigger, etc. So it's just to kind of set the scene by what we mean. And I suppose just to say that SAUSA is very much internationally recognized, so that definition would be one that would be used right across the world. Types of trauma, again, just, I know that I'm speaking to people that understand it here, but it's just to give you an idea. So you can have a single instant trauma, which is just something that's unexpected that happened and it's overwhelming. Repetitive or complex trauma that's ongoing throughout your life. Developmental trauma, which is obviously early exposure to trauma, and it can be ongoing. And we all know that what happens in 0 to 3 years of age, 0 to 5, can have a long-term impact right across our lifespan now, as we learn about the brain development and infant mental health and the supports that are required around that. Kind of intergenerational trauma, the effects from living with trauma survivors. There's been a lot of research done on intergenerational trauma and even how it can impact your DNA. Historical trauma, for example, residential schools, and vicarious or secondary trauma, which, you know, can very much happen when you're providing services that are frontline to people that have been impacted by trauma. So you can find that staff, you know, as a result of being that empathetic engagement, the trauma is actually impacting them. And then you can have the experience of immigrants, refugees, and ethnic minorities. So they're the different types of trauma. I really like this infographic. Dr. Karen Treisman has some amazing infographics. They're all free. Her website is safehandsthinkingminds.co.uk. And, you know, a picture speaks 1,000 words. So, you know, trauma is layered, it's interlinked, and it's interwoven. It can happen at any age and stage of our lives, and the impact and consequences are shaped by a number of things. But again, you can see there you've got the relational, attachment or interpersonal trauma, developmental trauma, and again, Dr. Treisman talks about trauma that can occur in utero as well. You've abuse and maltreatment, so the physical, sexual, emotional abuse, neglect, domestic violence, and that can be for the person that's experiencing it, and also children growing up in the home. Cultural, racial, intergenerational, single, you know, instant like a car crash, etc. War, grief, bereavement, natural disasters. And then, you know, I suppose what we're focusing on a lot is in terms of organizational system and institutional trauma. As a city trying to become trauma sensitive, we have to become very much aware of the roles that organizations and systems can play in re-traumatizing, in causing trauma, and in ensuring that we put policies in place that you know, prevents that from happening. So I think, you know, this is a great kind of visual there that kind of gives you a really good idea of what we're talking about. So in terms of creating citywide trauma awareness, sensitivity and healing through relationships, what am I talking about and what are we trying to do? So Cork as a city has launched a strategy and a 45-minute e-training module as part of our framework towards becoming trauma sensitive. Cork as a city aspire that every single worker would have a trauma lens in their interaction, or they would at least have access to that trauma lens that they can kind of put on and go, okay, you know, what's happening here in this situation? Can I put on this lens and have a look and see, can I view what's happening for the person differently? Our aim is to grow local expertise along with collaborating with international experts. We have to date increased awareness of adverse childhood experiences, ACEs and trauma to over 450 frontline practitioners, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. We have established an interagency steering group on trauma, and that was established in 2019 by the then Lord Mayor, Dr. John Sheehan. Across the University College Cork, they have ACEs research groups across their 4 colleges, and they do meet to talk about trauma, adversity, and research and development there. Our aim is to build trauma awareness into the statutory bodies across our city. We are a member of the Trauma Informed Prevention and Adverse Childhood Experiences Task Force through the World Health Organization as part of Cork Healthy Cities. We've presented to that, and we've been involved in the development there of, I suppose, a European approach to trauma sensitivity, trauma awareness, and the agreed kind of steps and definitions, etc. We believe very much that by building resilience in our services and communities, we will build a city that is trauma sensitive. So I suppose, what do we mean by that? Like, what's the vision? So a trauma sensitive city approach is a commitment to all our citizens, not just children. And that's really important because a lot of the time when we talk about trauma and we talk about adverse childhood experiences, we think about children and young people, but actually children and young people grow into adults. It endorses and supports relationships, practices and environments that promote safety, predictability, empowerment and control. I suppose trauma-informed practice and a trauma-sensitive approach support a deeper understanding and awareness of the prevalence and role that trauma can play in people's lives, and that healing, and this is really important, comes from responsive relationships. So we want to promote resilience and understanding through the integration of this knowledge. So that responsive relationship, that one good adult, is really key. And I suppose our mission really is to promote citywide trauma awareness, sensitivity and healing with a focus on relationships. So that one good adult really can't be kind of, I suppose, underestimated. And this is just a little screenshot of one of our last trainings that we did in City Hall with Dr. Treisman just before COVID. So, we didn't realize that day how blessed we were to all be in a room together, because it was so long before we were all able to get together again. So we had nearly 500 people there that day, free of charge, to attend a 2-day training around organizational trauma and how to develop systems within organizations to allow them to become trauma sensitive and trauma informed. And I suppose, as a city holding a trauma lens at its core, we need to hold the values of trauma sensitive practice, and they are promoting safety. It needs to be person-centered, kind in its responses, and work collaboratively, empowering and recognise resilience within a person, a family and a community. And I suppose even using words like that, kind in its responses, you very much are looking at changing the type of language that you're using as a public body in order to really kind of shift that lens to become trauma sensitive. So this is just a little infographic, and the reason that it's done as a river is there is no end destination, there is no flag raising, and this is an ongoing journey that has to be evaluated and re-looked at, and up-to-date training given on a regular basis. So prior to April 2019, I suppose it's my role as a RAPA coordinator, and I have previously worked in homeless services, I would have seen a correlation and a link between some of the areas that would be designated disadvantaged and the number of people that were maybe presenting as homeless. I would have seen through my role as RAPA coordinator, I suppose sitting on school completion programs, different youth services and different boards across the city, services talking about the same family, maybe 1, 2, 3 generations in, and wondering how is it that I suppose the program of delivery, how is it that this is the 3rd generation of this family coming through the school completion, for example. So I began to look into adverse childhood experiences at that point, and the link between the intergenerational trauma and how that can come down through the family line. So I began to talk then to schools and different services and agencies around the idea of exploring adverse childhood experiences at the time, and what that might mean in terms of their delivery, and if there was a greater understanding what that meant for how they would provide their service. So around 2017, 2018, I would have travelled to Derry for their MACES, the launch of their MACES programme, which is Multi-Adverse Childhood Experiences, which is a cross-border programme up there, to look at the beginning of what would it look like for Cork. So I suppose there was a lot of time spent prior to any training being delivered in Cork, really looking at what was happening on the island of Ireland, what was happening into what's best practice, and I suppose what the research was telling us in terms of trauma and ACEs. So then fast forward to April 2019, where we held, through the then Lord Mayor, Councillor Mick Finn, who would have been a school completion programme coordinator at the time, and now works for the youth services in the ETB, would have taken on as part of his team as Lord Mayor, really looking at promoting an understanding around trauma. So that would have been the first call that we would have put out prior to a steering committee being established. And through a partnership approach, through TUSLA, the HSE, Cork City Council and the ETB, we would have funded free training for 350 individuals across 2 days, looking at developing an understanding of the impact of relational developmental trauma and adverse childhood experiences. And across those 2 days, those 350 individuals who would have been very much frontline focused really got to delve into gaining an understanding. And the idea behind that was that we could develop a framework and a language across the city. October 2019, we established a trauma steering group. Myself and Dr. Jennifer Hayes, as part of the HSE Cork City Council collaboration, would have attended the Action on Trauma conference in Belfast, where we would have gained a vast array of knowledge from across the globe. And then I would have presented at the first Trauma Informed Prevention of Adverse Childhood Experiences, World Health Organization task force in November 2019. And also we would have presented at Trauma Informed Care conference in Dublin. So then in January 2020, we made a commitment in April 2019 that we would have Dr. Karen Treisman back. And again, through that collaborative approach, through the steering committee, we had another 450 individuals attend. And that was really around looking at how you could become trauma informed and responsive as an organisation. What do we need to look at culturally? What do we need to look at within the organisation? So again, that was a really good 2 days. Then COVID hit, so we went online and we would have done some training around the resilience documentary with different individuals through youth workers, family support. And then we went back to our monthly steering group meetings, and I'll talk through who's on the committee a little bit later. But I suppose the most important part there is we really reached out to look at who could we learn from, what best practice was there. So we learned from Lancashire Police, Plymouth, Trauma Informed Network, Novus, Trauma Informed Education, and many other different groups came and spoke to us, which was really, really enriching for us before we ever looked at developing our strategy. We also ran a pilot programme in Cork, 6 days across 10 schools and 2 school completion programmes, 54 participants in terms of trauma responsive education. So 2022 and beyond, where are we? We have developed a bespoke 45-minute e-training module, which I'll speak to you about. That sits on HSE land as well as Cork City Council website. We're developing communities of practice. We're trying to grow and develop new partnerships and collaborations. We have a pledge, which I will talk to you about. We have our strategy that we have launched, which is it's a 3-year strategy, but we very much see it as a living, breathing document, which will grow and change as we develop further, and it's looking at new partnerships and collaborations. So there's different levels of trauma awareness. I'm not really going to go into them. Just, I suppose, we pitch ourselves as a city as trauma sensitive. To say you were trauma informed as a city would be very difficult. Some organizations can never be fully trauma informed because of what they have to deliver as their service. Some can only be trauma aware, some can be trauma responsive. So I suppose as a city, and through the guidance of Dr. Karen Treisman, we would have said that trauma sensitive is where we need to sit. And the most important part is this is a process. There's no end state. You're never done. So like other cities, I suppose internationally, including Plymouth, Lancashire, Tarpon Springs, and Florida, we recognise the need to develop plans to become trauma sensitive, which has an organisational structure for our city and framework that involves recognising, understanding and responding to trauma, which children, adolescents and communities are exposed to. So first of all, we have to acknowledge that the trauma is there, and it's how do we put those frameworks and structures in place. And for us as a city to become trauma sensitive, we have to realise the widespread impact of trauma. We need to understand those potential pathways for recovery. We need to recognise the signs and symptoms in our citizens who are involved within the systems that operate within our city. We need to be able to respond by fully integrating the knowledge about trauma into our policies, our procedures, our practices. And really, the most important is to seek to actively resist re-traumatization. So this is not a small project. There are many small bites of a very large apple to be taken here, and lots of steps. And by developing the strategy and launching it, it has really put us to task with ensuring that we do do all of these and ensure that our systems that operate within our system are, not re-traumatizing people. So I suppose just to say, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAUSA, which is the internationally recognised, guidance on trauma, have a number of strengths-based framework that is underpinned by 6 core principles. Those are, and I'm going to talk you through them. So we have safety, trustworthiness, transparency, peer support, collaboration, mutuality, cultural sensitivity, and empowerment. So what do I mean by all of those? And this is what our strategy is based on. So in terms of safety, I mean that the physical, psychological, and emotional safety of our service users and staff are prioritised by people knowing they are safe, or being able to ask for what they need to feel safe. That there's a reasonable freedom from threat or harm within services and organisations. There's an attempt to prevent re-traumatization, and that we're ensuring that we're putting policies, practice and safeguarding arrangements in place across our organisations. In terms of trustworthiness and transparency, we need to ensure that within our organisational policies and procedures, that the objectives of building trust among staff, service users and the wider community through the organisation staff explaining what they are doing and why they are doing it, the organisation staff doing what they say they will do. So if we say we're going to do something, that we do it, whether that's at the basic level of key working with an individual or at a policy level, right throughout the organisation, and that expectations are being made clear and the organisation staff are not over-promising and not saying that they can do something that they can't do. In terms of peer support, service users are supported in shared decision-making, choice and goal setting to determine the plan of action they need to heal and move forward. We do this by ensuring service user and staff have a voice in the decision-making process within the organisation and its services and right across the city. Listening to the needs and wishes of our service users and staff, explaining choices clearly and being really transparent, acknowledging the people who have experienced or are experiencing trauma may feel a lack of safety or control over the course of their life, which can cause difficulties in developing those trusting relationships. Collaboration and mutuality, the value of staff and service user experiences is recognised in overcoming challenges and improving the system as a whole. We do this by using formal and informal peer support and mutual self-help. The organisation asking service users and staff what they need and collaboratively considering how these needs could be met. We focus on working alongside and actively involving service users in the delivery of services. Empowerment and voice and choice. Again, efforts are made to share power and give service users and staff a strong voice in the decision-making process, both at an individual and organisational level. Again, we do this through validating feelings and concerns of staff and service users, listening to what a person wants and needs. And that's meeting somebody really where they're at, supporting people to make decisions and take action, and acknowledging that people who have experienced or are experiencing trauma may feel powerless to control what happens to them. They may feel isolated by their experiences and have feelings of low self-worth. And cultural sensitivity, again, move past cultural stereotypes and biases based on, for example, gender, sexual orientation, age, religion, disability, geography, race, or ethnicity. And we do this by offering access to gender responsive services, leveraging the healing value of traditional cultural connections, and incorporating policies, protocols, and processes that are responsive to the needs of individuals that we serve. So there's a lot in those principles that we are obviously aiming to, I suppose, hold up within our policy and across our city. So how did we go about doing that? I suppose we developed a number of strategic goals. So first of all, we had to develop the steering committee. We had to bond as a steering committee, and the steering committee is open for membership. So, if people want to join it, they can join it. There's new organizations joining on a monthly basis. We had to have a goal around training and workforce development, systems development. We've developed a pledge. I will go through all of this now in a minute, or a memorandum of understanding, and there needs to be an element of research and evaluation. So I suppose just to say that we'll say Lancashire or Plymouth or Tarpon Springs in Florida, none of that has been evaluated. So what we are attempting to do as a city is to evaluate what we're doing from the outset, so that when, you know, this will be a roadmap that any city can hopefully then take up and go with, because we will have evaluated it. So in terms of system development, I suppose I'll go to the right hand of the screen first and talk about the members of our steering committee. So one of, I think, the strengths we have as a city in Cork is around the partnership and that collaborative working. We would work across a number of different layers, I suppose, that are very much interwoven. So Cork would have been an integrated services program test site many years ago. We have the RAPID program, you know, the LCDC for COVID would have set up a citywide community response forum. So that working together and the trust that is built across the organizations is very much, I suppose, the foundation is very solid. So our steering committee has over 30 members, and we have the Garda Síochána, we have the Cork ETB, we have both MTU and UCC, the universities, we have TUSLA, across the HSE, we have social inclusion, public health, mental health, drug and alcohol services, GPs, Department of Social Protection, ourselves in the council, school completion programs, probation services, homeless services, traveller visibility group, a number of elected members, the RAPID program, healthy cities, addiction services, and area-based childhood committee. So we've quite, you know, it's a really rich group of people sitting on the steering committee. A lot have been there since the beginning and have sat through all of the different learnings in terms of what we've learned from the different cities and organisations. So it's a really good committed group. So what we've developed is a number of tiers. So the first tier in our systems development is just general awareness, and that is, I suppose, being delivered through the e-module. So the e-module is a 45-minute module, which sits on the HSE Land website. So I think for yourselves and organisations that are funded through the HSE, they have access to it, as do all HSE staff, TUSLA staff, and then it sits on the council website as well. That's a 45-minute very basic introduction. There is an assessment at the end of it, and there's an 80% pass rate that you need to get through it. And that was a collaboration between the Department of Public Health, UCC, MTU, and Cork City Council, and the ETB and TUSLA. So Dr. Sharon Lambert would speak on it. The two Norries, you may have heard of them, have shared their life experiences on it. We had a number of experts collaborate on that. So that's the first tier. Tier 2 then is around enhancing trauma-sensitive practices and skills development, developing trauma champions, and trauma-focused services. And then tier 3 is that development of the leadership and the corporate governance, our pledge, and looking at that organizational change and that trauma lens. So there's a lot within it. There's a lot within the tiers. So in terms of the trauma champions, what we're looking to do, and I suppose what we understand is, like, in order for change to happen within each of our partner organizations, each of those organizations needs to have a champion who we will provide training for, so that they're very much confident and competent in terms of their understanding of trauma. And so as policies and procedures come up within organizations, that trauma champion can be really looking at that lens and pushing for it to be more trauma informed. And I suppose we will provide that training for those champions, and we will have a community of practice that will meet quarterly. So all of those champions then can really share the challenges, and it can be very much, I suppose, enriched in terms of how we do things. I suppose in terms of developing governance leadership, it really is about looking at how we do it from the top down and the bottom up, and ensuring that that leadership is there at every level. So I will go through our training and workforce development and what we've done to date. So we've had our 4 days training, 2019, 2020, the 450 individuals. And you can see there the rich kind of, I suppose, range of people that would have attended the training. We've had our 2 screenings of the resilience documentary, and we've had our 6 days pilot, and we've been reviewing all of those, you know, with the schools and with the services. MTU then would have provided training across 11 colleges and schools in Cork in terms of, again, looking at that trauma awareness. It's a 3-hour trauma awareness training, and that's being evaluated as well. So that would be the first training that our trauma champions will do, and that'll be delivered by Dr. Judah Butler and Dr. Annie Cummins. And then the next, out of that, then we will develop our bespoke training for Cork. And the next thing we're doing is in June, on the 9th of June, we're having a conference hosted by MTU and Cork Trauma Sensitive Cities around conversations on promising practice, how we envisage Cork as a trauma sensitive city. So the pledge is key to everything that we're doing. So I've talked through the different layers of like the governance and the leadership, the policy development, the trauma champions, but none of that will work without the pledge. So I suppose a large part of the process is setting a framework for Cork involved the learning from other cities, first of all, so that we felt really confident in what it was that we wanted in terms of our goals, our vision, our mission. And the idea behind the pledge then is to support our partner organizations or anyone across the city that wants to sign up to being trauma sensitive. So this was a key element for us, because it's that level of commitment. You know, you're signing this to say, we as an organization, me as an individual, we as a school, we as a community really want to uphold these values. It makes the strategy, I suppose, a living document, because the partners are committed to it via the pledge. And I suppose it's really tying in and embedding the policy and I suppose those 6 key factors that I spoke to you about. It affords all of the organizations an opportunity to reflect as well on how they can, I suppose, transfer those principles as laid out in the strategy into their organization and how they can commit to it. And it allows the staff, which is really important, to feel that their contribution towards the goals are valued, so that those individuals that put their hand up and say, I'm really interested in being a trauma champion, and feel that there's that commitment by management. So what is the pledge? So basically it's around, I'm going to talk you through it because it's really important. So Cork as a city is committed to addressing the causes and consequences of previously unrecognised and unaddressed trauma through coordinated and comprehensive city-wide efforts. We're all in this together. There's no, you know, while as a city council we're leading it, we're all equal partners around the table. So as a party to this memorandum of understanding, we join Cork City in committing to becoming a trauma-sensitive organisation. And in our understanding that there is a correlation that exists between the occurrence of childhood adversity and toxic stress, which without support can lead to serious emotional, behaviour, medical and health challenges. We understand the cumulative effect of these experiences can have on the potential to severely impact both individuals and society, often manifesting in illness, addictions, depression, other mental and emotional challenges, as well as developmental disorders, unemployment, poverty, domestic violence, child abuse, neglect, homelessness, incarceration, premature death and suicide, and the importance of having good relationships and positive daily interactions in healing trauma. So we all have a key role in this, and so we're kind of saying this is what you're signing up to. And on the other side, what we're saying is we want to generate an awareness of Cork Trauma Sensitive City. So by signing this, we're agreeing to generate the awareness as a city initiative within your organisation. We are committed to providing the opportunity, encouraging all staff to do the e-training modules. So like to date, there's over 600 staff in the council have completed it. And there's over 600 in there might be a bit more now in the HSE and HSE land have completed it. We are looking to identify as an organisation 1 to 3 trauma champions within your organisation who will be available to engage in the communities of practice on a quarterly basis. So, you know, you're signing this saying as an organisation, we will free up those 1 to 3 trauma champions, and then those trauma champions know when they're signing up that their organisation is supporting them. Again, to practice and promote trauma sensitivity among our colleagues, friends, family, community, some of whom can struggle daily with trauma-related challenges, and the rest of us may know nothing about, and to engage in a review process in collaboration with the wider group. So by signing this, you really are signing up to a living, breathing document. And I suppose it's putting us all to task, like, have we done it? Have we signed it? Have we identified our trauma champions? You know, and then it ensures that we then as a steering committee make sure that the training is up to date, the best practice is being delivered across the city. So this was, I suppose this is a new idea in terms of a citywide pledge. Part of then what we have agreed to do is to evaluate this. So the research design, I suppose, I'm doing it as part of my PhD in partnership with NTU and Cork City Council. So, you know, there will be the literature review. We have developed the framework design. We will develop the bespoke training for the city and we will evaluate it. So it really is looking at, you know, how do we do it? What's working? What's not working? How has the model worked? Where does it need to be tweaked? Does it need to be tweaked per organisation or at a citywide level? You know, how has the pledge worked, etc. So there'll be large scale, I suppose, surveys as well as qualitative interviews. And then we would look to be obviously disseminating it on a national basis. So right across the whole process of this, we will be evaluating it. And I think that's key to this because it means that we have to look at tweaking it as we go. Part of, I suppose, what I will say, I will send this out and you can have it. That's the link to our website. And there's just a nice little YouTube link there that just explains the biology of toxic stress. But part of the key to all of this, I suppose, is really very much around bringing partners with us, ensuring that partners can very much come in at the level that they feel comfortable. So it's not putting anyone under pressure, because being trauma informed isn't about putting an organization under pressure. So if the first step is that you're just going to commit to all of your staff doing the 45-minute e-training module, that's where you can come in. So everybody can come in where they want to, but the important part is signing the pledge. Right, I can see it's 10:40 there now and I've whittled on quite a bit. So I would say thank you very much. I hope that I've explained what we're doing. It is very much a journey and a process. We are not trauma sensitive to date, and there will be no flag at the end of it. It will be a constant you know, evaluation process to make sure that we're living up to those principles and values. So I'm happy to take any questions there now.
Thank you, Sandra. That was wonderful. That was really informative, really clear, and really appreciate it. So I would encourage people to put their questions into the Q&A or the chat, and I'll interrogate Sandra with them. But I suppose a couple of things. That notion of never being done, and it's kind of, I'm assuming that's to do with you constantly need to refresh this. It's not a, as you say, you're not, okay, we've done all 10 staff, therefore we can say, and we can park it for a quarter or 6 months while, I mean, then the culture is gone, so we need to refresh. It's more about, it's the constant. Is that right?
Yeah, I suppose what it is you're changing how you work and your approach to work. So this is, you're really trying to challenge yourself to have a different lens. So there is no flag, you know, the way sometimes you'll have a strategy and at the end of it we'll say we achieved UNESCO learning city status. We are a learning city. You know, there was an award ceremony. That's not what this is. This is a constant. So you have to always be looking at your physical environment. How does it feel to be a service user coming in here? You know, just because you know, when you have a new building, again, you know, you need to be looking at that, or new staff coming in, ensuring they're trained. Also, how we are with our own staff, how are we supporting them? So like, there's so many layers to it. You're never done. And even if you are done, if you say you're done, then really, I would say you need to be reflective on, are we still being trauma informed? Do you know what I mean? In our approach.
So the other thing that stands out to me in the work as you think through it is, one of the difficulties will be power dynamics. So on the steering group, there's a really impressive array of organizations and individuals on that steering group, which bodes well, I think, because it's more than just, it's Cork the city. It's not Cork City the staff room and the city hall, if you like. It is Cork City, which I think is wonderful. But I suppose within each of those organizations, there's also power dynamics that have to be addressed. You know, people feel they're protecting people, but maybe because those dynamics being difficult. So as you think those through, has that arisen? Is the rate at which people can adopt this, or indeed the extent to which people, the way the work can adopt it? You raised that in one of the, you know, the difference between trauma sensitive and trauma informed is in part because of the way that you're structured. And how did those manifest themselves in the early stages?
Yeah, so I suppose the first thing is that everyone's equal on the steering committee. You know, there is no, so I think that's the most important thing. And there is already a trust very much developed across the city through the different programs that we have, that I suppose everybody has felt comfortable to say, this is where our organization can pitch something. There, as you can see from the list, there's a lot of, with national organizations there, TUSLA, the Department of Social Protection, Garda Síochána. So, you know, they're not nationally adopting this, they're locally adopting this. And then obviously as we review it, we would hope that it would become something that would be national. So it is very much, if you're being trauma informed and how you do things, it's meeting people where they're at as well within their organization and what they feel they can deliver. So by signing the pledge, you know, we've made it kind of simple, and we will provide all of the support. And in terms of the power dynamics, it's very much an equal playing field in terms of how the committee is run and how and I suppose the other thing that we have ensured that we've done as a city is all of the training we've given to date has been free of charge, so that no organization has been, you know, we didn't want an organization to say, well, we can only send one person because that's 120 euros. So everything that we've tried to pitch through that is recognizing that community groups on the ground or communities can't afford to be sending 10 staff at, you know, so that's where the partners like TUSLA and the ETB come in, and the city council say, well, we will put our funding together to ensure that nobody, you know what I mean? So am I answering your question?
Yeah. I think one of the questions that's just come in there was, how challenging was it to bring all stakeholders along collaboratively, which I think is what you've been answering.
It wasn't, because I think as a city, we are very blessed in, we're kind of like a little village, you know, in a way, even though it's Cork is a big city. Those, I suppose an example I would give is obviously COVID happened, and, you know, within a couple of hours, we had divided the city into 16 area teams. We had volunteers, we had, you know, set up the COVID community response, which is then integrated into the response in terms of the Ukrainians coming in. So as a city, the willingness was there. There was nobody said no, you know, and I suppose what we were trying to do with that initial training was, we would never have seen that we would get this, you know, we've kind of come quite far in a short space of time, but nobody has said, not a single person said, no, we don't want to be involved in that. Everybody was very much, yes, how can we be involved? And now, and it will get uncomfortable when you have to push people to, you know, how's the pledge going? How many you know, how many people are being trained, etc. So it is around, you know, but we've all bought into that, and we've all signed up to that pledge was developed collaboratively, that we all said, yeah, we need to have something to keep us in check as well, you know. So yeah, everybody came along, and as I said, we've people asking on a monthly basis, how do we become involved? Can we be part of the steering committee, or is there different levels that we can come in on?
Okay. Just a message here from Colette Kelleher, who I'm sure you know, and she wants to commend your leadership on Cork City, and we have a long way to go, but good to be on the road. What you said. Yeah. So it's always true. But I think that's an interesting, because that's something we saw in homeless services, was the impact of COVID and the cooperation that happened when it was seen as, I mean, homelessness was seen as through the lens of the health crisis that was COVID, and the way that everybody activated and collaborated across agency was really quite powerful and hopeful. I think there's a sense that we have perhaps regressed a little bit in that we haven't maybe maintained. I think we've still held on to some of the good on the ground relationships, but I suppose from a policy perspective, and certainly in terms of the numbers of people in homelessness, we've gone past where we were previously. I just wondered, was this an area where there was increased momentum, as you've just outlined, because of COVID and people kind of pulling together? And has that been built upon? Or was COVID well, it wasn't an opportunity, but a driving factor, or a stalling factor in all of this?
Yeah, so I would say COVID stalled it a little bit, in that obviously we couldn't meet, and there was other priorities, which was ensuring that as a city, you know, people had were able to get to hospital appointments, and food, had access to food and whatever services they needed. So I suppose our focus as a city shifted to ensuring that, you know, all of our citizens, you know, there was a lot of calls to get to chemo and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So it paused it, and obviously we couldn't have in-person meetings, but we did do the resilience documentaries and design the kind of education side of it. But I would say since COVID, what it has done is COVID was a trauma that we were all in. Now, we were all in the same ocean, but not in the same boat. And I think that really very much was evident, you know, across our city and across the world in terms of how people experienced COVID, whether it was in your own family or out in your street or within your community or within your organization. So there was certainly, I think, an increased level of understanding of what trauma can do, both on a personal level, you know, because everybody was in it and everybody was impacted differently, and then also within an organization. So then coming back together, it was very much like, no, there is a need for a really clear understanding of what we mean by trauma, how it has impacted people. And I suppose what I would have found in particular, because we've done a lot of work with schools and with youth services, is that it's very much within the language now and the framework, and people are being brave and putting their hand up and saying, well, actually, our children are very much impacted since COVID, you know, because maybe they were living in, you know, in houses where there was a lot of poverty, and there could have been a lot of different stresses, and they can see, you know, so it gave people the confidence to use that framework and stuff. So it certainly, I think COVID, while it paused it, it then really drove it as well, in terms of, yes, there really is a need for this, and having that understanding across our city, you know.
It's really interesting. And Mick Price, again, with the question of is there any client or service user participation?
Yeah, so not yet, there isn't. Like, we obviously have partner organizations such as the Traveller Visibility Group and different I suppose organizations around the table. We're not at that point yet. We only launched the strategy last November. But we're very much open to that. And I suppose when I look at the Plymouth model, which is one of the models we would have very much examined, now they worked the opposite way to us. So they set up like a city, you know, they kind of did all the training first and are only at the stage of kind of setting up the committee now. It was a different way, but their monthly talks that they do training, which is what we'd envisage doing as well, is open to everybody. And that's one of the reasons why we sat the e-module on the City Council website. Everybody can access it in the whole of Ireland. You just log on to, you know, so that's the beginning of that. But that is really, it is key to have, I suppose, individuals. But the other thing I will say is we're all human beings sitting around the table, and we all come with our own backstory, and you know, so I think there's a lot of knowledge there already, but it is one of the next steps for us.
Okay. So I suppose part of that, I think it's interesting that you have identified that kind of the research and evaluation is something that you've clearly put in early, where you were saying the others who were maybe considered early adopters, or who Plymouth and so forth, who you're learning from, didn't have that built in. I mean, why did you identify that? Because I suppose from a service perspective, as a service provider, that is something that's, yeah, for us is always very important, because you want to see what the impact of it. But why did that stand out to you as something to introduce early? And what's your evaluation of why it wasn't done, why it hasn't been done in the other areas? So
I think a lot of the time, you know this yourself as an organization, or, you know, when groups are set up, they're just very busy doing the work. And it's only afterwards they think, oh, if only we'd actually evaluated this now, we'd have a really good model of practice. So I suppose if you're really, we're very lucky we've UCC and MTU sitting around the table. You know, we have a lot of academic minds sitting there, which would, you know, the importance of kind of evaluating it. But also I think what we're doing is it's different. It hasn't been done to date in Ireland in terms of a citywide. So in order to do it and to do it well, we do need to evaluate it so we can see what's not working as well, because this is our strategy. You know, when I look at other strategies and I look at what they've done in Scotland, we very much have actually followed, we'll say naturally, it's just come out that way, but we need to know what we're doing well and what we're not doing well as well. And we need to be able to say, well, that didn't work, or actually this So that's why we looked at evaluating it from the beginning. And I think a lot of the time we look back on things and we think, if only we'd have a, you know what I mean? Because you would have a model, but you can't say it's best practice because you haven't actually evaluated it from the beginning.
And in terms of that evaluation, is there kind of a what's the word? Sort of an evaluation of where we are now to where we are. So do you have your what's the word, starting point, or your initial indicators that you're going to look at in 2 years' time or 3 years' time? And what are the major ones of those? Like, what stands out to you as the kind of the...
Well, I suppose the biggest one for us is, we have evaluated, and every time we do a training, we evaluate what people's knowledge and attitudes were prior to it and afterwards. And again, it's the other one is around looking at what policies exist within organizations before the strategy and after. So those kind of, but they will develop. The thing about this is it very much is living, it's very much live, and they will develop as we go on. But certainly it's around the attitude changes are the biggest ones, both within how do the policies change, and the language within our policies is really important. So we're doing the review of the LECP at the moment in Cork, and very much trying to get that trauma lens on how does that read for somebody, how do we make it feel real for a person, how is it, you know what I mean? So it's all of that stuff.
Sounds wonderful. Okay, so we're coming up to 5 to 11, and if anybody has any final questions for Sandra, do throw them into the Q&A there.
Just to say as well, I suppose the e-training module, we would have had service user participation in the design and the delivery of that as well, just in terms of even though the two Naries speak on it, James and Timmy, I'm not sure they're very big in Cork, but we just assume because they've been on the Late Late Show, on the Tommy Tiernan show, that everybody knows them. And we would have had Marion Rackard on there as well, and a number of different, so it was very important when that was being designed that it was very much pitched at the level, and that everybody was as inclusive as possible.
And just to say, we will circulate a version of the slides and some of the information to everyone who participated, so that those resources that you outlined there will make sure they get to, so people can have a look at sort of at the source material, as well as the chats. And just to say thanks to everyone who's stuck with us, who attended, who's asked questions. I hope you got as much out of it as I did, and thank you to Sandra for a really excellent talk. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. And just to say, we are next month, the talk will be the Royal Institute of Architects in Ireland, who will be talking about density. So a very different topic, but all housing and homelessness related as per usual. So with that, we will close, and I'll thank you all again, and have a very good day and have a great week.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.